I remember Proof coming up to me, telling me, Proof came to my house. Proof used to stay the weekend sometime at my house. And Bugs would stay at my house. Bazaar sometime would stay the night because might be working on beats, listening to beats, whatever. I remember Proof came to my house and said to me, "You need to talk to your boy." And I was like, "Why?" And he was like, "What is all this drug he's talking? Like, you got to stop him, man. Like, he's out of control." I was like, "Man, he's with Dr. Dre. I am not telling that dude to stop nothing."
So what, were you around before he was on drugs, or when did all that come in?
Oh yeah. I was around before, the middle, and after. The last time I spoke to him, he was going into rehab, and I haven't spoke to him since.
Okay, so
that was 2006.
Oh, okay.
It's probably the last time I spoke to him.
Okay, so what was the like on and off drugs? What was the difference?
Wow. Well, it was very different, very, very different. Like I said, remember when I told you they used to have the hat brimmed down and didn't make eye contact, and really meticulous and articulate, and and just like a spitter. He was just he just machine gunning raps into the crowd. That's what he was focused on back then. He wasn't on drugs then. He barely drank, to be honest with you. Barely drank. I think I might have saw him like smoke weed once. Between 96 and 99. So those 3 years, 95 to 99, those 4 years, I didn't see him. I might have saw him smoke one joint, and that's about it. And maybe he drank a 40 with us or something like that. But that was basically it. His first show after he got signed to Dre was called the Aftermath Rave. It was a rave, and it was my group as an opener. I believe the Brigade, which eventually, the Brigade was Mr. Porter and Kaniva, and which eventually they ended up in D12. They were already a part of D12 before, but they had their own group called the Brigade. I believe they performed. I know Bazaar performed. And I remember seeing him. He had the blonde hair. And I had seen him with the blonde hair before, but for the first time performing and doing whippets in the back. And he was on 10. I had never seen him like this before, ever. Just bug-eyed,
For people who watch him, what's whippets?
So there would be like the helium balloon tanks, okay, like that. So you'd have a nitrous oxide tank, and you'd fill it up with a balloon, fill it up in a balloon, and you would inhale that. And they used to sell those balloons at parties, at raves, at after-hour spots for like $5. It's the same. You'd get the same effect from a Cool Whip can. That you just spray it when there's no more Cool Whip in it. You could get high off of the contents of it, and that inhaling that nitrous oxide will get you high, and it also fries the shit out of your brain cells. So I'd seen him on 10 doing that.
Was that the first drugs you seen him doing?
No, I seen him do Tylenol 3s a lot.
What's a Tylenol 3?
Tylenol 3 is a painkiller. It's like it's the next step of, it's the, you take a couple Tylenol for a headache to go away, right?
Right.
If you sprained your ankle, a Tylenol 3 it would make you feel better. You wouldn't feel that pain.
Oh,
so
okay.
It's just the next step.
So he was just popping pain, kind of like pain pills, but Tylenol.
Exactly. He would take Tylenol 3s. But he'd get them from his mother. I mean, he documented this in his songs. You know, he like in the one song where he says, "Where
do you think I picked up
where do you think I picked up the habit?" You know, like I just lift up the mattress. I literally seen him lift up her mattress and take her drugs. So they weren't his. It was his mother's drugs. So he was taking her pills. I remember when he was with Dre and he had just did My Name Is. He called me from LA, and my girl at the time, she was an ER emergency room tech at a hospital, and he knew that, and he called me and said, "Hey, ask Melissa what it means when you're pissing blood." And I was like, "What? What do you mean you're pissing blood?" And he's like, "Yeah, like I'm pissing blood." And she was like, "Yeah, that's from the Tylenol 3s that you're taking. Like, you need to stop. If you don't stop, like, it's gonna be bad." She's like, the lining in your stomach is tearing. Like, you gotta stop." And I don't know if it freaked him out or anything like that, but he told me he was done and all that. He was pissing blood. That made him stop. But you know what? He told me that random people, when he got his record deal, random people would show up at his hotel door where he was staying at in LA, knock on the door. He'd open up the door. They would just hand him a brown bag.
Wow.
And in that brown bag was like weed, pills, whatever. They thought maybe, I don't know if they thought that he was like that already, that sparked the craziness, or maybe that helped inspire the crazy,
So this happened. So before he even started doing drugs, people were just giving him drugs, and they just thought.
Yeah, I mean, and I remember the Warped Tour. It was like the first major tour he was on with Ice-T. And all the rock acts and stuff like that were on the Warped Tour. I remember people throwing shit on stage, like throwing blunts and fucking whatever they could, throwing pills on stage. I remember that shit. I'm not saying he would pick them up off the nasty stage and do it, but people hear that persona, see that persona. Now they're gonna feed that persona. I know there was probably people around back then who were like, could give him whatever he wanted. I mean, there was one time. I mean, there was a few times. Like I was scared for my man.
He almost OD'd or something, or
no? I didn't see. When I heard that when he told that story that he had OD'd, I wasn't around for that, but I was around for the times of telling him like, "Yo, man, you need to chill." Like I remember he's such a studio rat, in the studio all the time. That's really his drug, the studio. He's got a studio in his house. I don't know if he's got a studio in his house now, but back then he had a studio he could go to, and he had a studio in his house. He'd do 8 hours in the studio. He'd get up in the morning. This was after the fame, after 3 albums, 4 albums. When I was around the studio sessions of those days, because that time between Slim Shady LP and probably Encore, right before Encore, I didn't get to see none of that, because that's just explosion, and then you're just off into the races. I wasn't around for none of that. But Encore, I know I was around for, because I had my major debut on Geffen I was working on, and he produced 2 songs on that album and performed on one of them. So I was around that scene, that studio vibe, and seeing that. But he was so dedicated to Haley that he would put 8 hours in the studio out somewhere at a real studio. And then he had a studio in his house, and those engineers would come to his house, and he'd do another 4 hours or whatever they needed to do. And they could be editing, they could be, mixing, doing whatever, while he could be upstairs hanging with Haley, because Haley was just, Haley was always priority, But being around that and telling him like, yo, he literally would tell me like, yo, man, like I'm straight up addicted to Ambien. He's like, I'm literally addicted to Ambien. And
To
Ambien
help him
is
sleep, so he couldn't sleep.
exactly. And to get him off of Ambien, they put him on Valium. So now you've got a guy that goes from being addicted to Ambien, now we're on tour, and he's addicted to Valium. So the whole, the tour that we were on was the anger management tour. It was 2004, 2005, mostly all of 2005, because it ended, the last date was Comerica Park here. That whole tour, like I seen him, and his face was bloated. He had fattened up a little bit. He had broke out in his face. You could just tell, like, whatever it was taking a toll on him. And I know he hated that. I know he didn't like that at all. But as soon as we got off tour, he went right into rehab, and he got clean. But I know he relapsed, which also sparked, that album, and he OD'd and almost died, But I'm so happy for him that dude is, who he is today. I think a lot of people who are in his shoes as he is today, they have to go through that in order to become greater. He was always great, but sometimes it takes that trial and, tribulation and turmoil and, stress and pressure and all that stuff built up so that you go through something so significant that it takes you to, the next level.